Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Hey, Pete.
Jay Gunkelman.
I was flipping through PowerPoints and stuff.
Yeah.
And I came upon a PowerPoint from John DeLuca, who was the person who experienced a hallucinogen while being studied at an ISNR meeting. There was a convening of the altered state section, which is a group that was formed in one of the rooms. And Juan Acosta Urquidi, who's passed recently from a cancer, did the EEG. He was a well-known researcher on consciousness and a shaman who had done a lot of work with altered consciousness folks with ayahuasca and so forth in various cultures, and actually was a well-published neuroscientist. He was on the cover of Nature with a jellyfish when they discovered acetylcholine. Anyway, he was there to do the EEG recording. And John smoked Salvia Divinorum. And, consciousness is an interaction between glia and neural networks that you can measure. And the infralow frequencies of glia and the gamma of neural networks end up interacting. And if you disturb either the fast or the slow end of that, the gamma or the infraslow, you have an altered consciousness. And Salvia Divinorum changes the EEG in a dramatic way. I was there to make sure that the EEG that was being recorded was a good EEG and it wasn't just some weird artifact or something like that. And in the actual EEG had waves that were 10 seconds long, an entire EEG page on screen, and 1,000 microvolts. And if you've seen EEGs, you're used to seeing 50 to 100, 150 microvolts, maybe in a kid, maybe a few hundred microvolts, but 1,000 microvolts, 10-second long waves, these are bizarre infralow frequency events. And it altered his awareness rather dramatically. And, it's about a 5-minute hallucination, and we did a 20-minute baseline, we studied this, 20-minute baseline EEG, a 5-minute hallucination, about a 10-minute recovery, and then he smoked another one and did another trip. Anyway, you would think that would have been the end of it, but no, we presented the data. First, a discussion about the the kappa opioids and the neurochemistry of it all. But then John had his PowerPoint, which he shared, and that PowerPoint basically went through the experience of the hallucination. And that PowerPoint is really, I think, one to share. It hasn't been seen in, oh goodness gracious, a long time. This is Are You Really Experienced? The John DeLuca experience. And he goes through and actually looks at the rating scale. Imagine that, a rating scale for how high you are. And it starts out with a level 1S, subtle effects, and increased relaxation. You feel something is happening, but and it's awfully subtle. And the next level is a 2A, and that's you actually start to have things change and enhanced appreciation of music. Space-time starts to be a little weird, and you become a little more intellectually playful, shall we say? Uh, your connections are a little looser,
Yeah.
and you might connect things that normally don't connect. So John tosses up a few of these things, but level 3, um,
We
closed
went through
eye.
those picks kind of fast, Jay. I,
So 1, 2.
yeah, that one.
These.
What
Oh
did that
well,
go under?
these are all like the altered experiences and appreciation of music that you had
Okay.
in state 2. And
Okay.
level 3, when you close your eyes, you see fractal patterns, vines, geometric images. Now, some of them, start to get more dimensional, hypnagogic experiences, visions. But they're not to be confused with reality. You see something, but you know you're seeing something. Now, level 4 starts to become a little bit more altered, and you start to have, instead of eye candy, you you start to go into an altered state. With your eyes closed, you go into a dream-like scene and 3D stuff, not two-dimensional, but three-dimensional, and you start to interact with spirits and entities, other egos that you perceive. And at that level, this is the shaman world, a dream time, and this is only level 4. There's levels yet to go, and with your eyes closed, you really feel different, not just eye candy. So a little further out, and level 5. Well, level 5, you sort of cease to exist. Your individuality is lost. You merge with God or goddess or mind or universal consciousness or whatever, and you basically um, are extremely altered, and um, this may be terrifying or exceedingly pleasant. Sometimes both. So, and the individual, if you're watching the person, they may appear confused or disoriented at this point because they're starting to cease to exist as a separate entity. They're merging with their surroundings and other entities. And now, level 6A, uh, loss of consciousness. And it's hard to recall the experience. You may feel like you've fallen, and you basically are sleepwalking, and this is not a desirable level because nothing can be recalled. This is an amnesic period, but you can go deeper. This is a little ditty written by somebody who had experienced salvia, and the salvia plant. It's a mint. Salvia is a mint. Now, it happens to be Salvia Divinorum. It's not just any old mint, it's a specific kind. And anyway, Neither I nor the universe and reality any longer existed. I was now part of a completely different existence with absolutely no connection to the outside of it. People do end up having um, the dissolution of ego. The sense of I is gone. The merger with others and all of that ends up happening. No longer had a concept of being anything at all, but some entity whose entire perception of previous life was implanted, was fake, was like a staged play. I knew I never really existed that way outside of our make-believe world that was implanted on us, yet I and people and animals and nature and air and empty spaces between objects were put through our paces of fake existence. So the sense of unreality of everything you experienced before, and you can dismiss anything and everything that you had experienced before. This is an extremely altered state. No denying or analyzing it. Where I found myself was real. I knew it, and there was no contemplating anything about it. That was it, and always was. There's no escape because there was nothing but this now. So that the the feeling of having left and transcended and being gone and irretrievably gone. So it gets extremely altered. Most intense realization was that I was completely alone. There was absolutely nothing but me anywhere. Any pain or tragedy I have ever experienced in previous realities seemed like a gracious gift compared to where I was now, and where I knew I would always be now. So, and this is an extremely altered state. The Grateful Dead.
Okay. Let me
I
sit that.
knew all awareness, existence, and life I previously saw was never real. That that's why there was never any way to go back to it, and there was simply no returning to normal. This is the new world that you're going to be in. Suddenly, with no indication of anything, this started to subside. I was jerked back out of that horror into reality as I knew it before this. In that instant, I found myself hanging halfway out of my bedroom window with the screen busted out, trying to climb out and screaming something like, "Mama, why?" So, uh, anyway, things can become horribly altered, and the return is a sudden being ripped back out of the altered reality and plunged back into the current reality. Where I was just second ago was so real and intense, it took some time to sink in that I now am back in the universe as I knew it before. Yeah. On Salvia, you don't ask questions because where you are is all there is. It's all there ever was. It's all you could ever know and possibly imagine.
All this is from that little mint leaf. Where do I buy these?
Oh, and they weren't illegal.
Yeah.
Salvia Divinorum, you probably find plenty of it online somewhere, and it's just a
Okay.
mint. And anyway, the summary of his experience. He had a level 5 experience. As the salvia took effect, it was like being sucked down the rabbit hole. He felt the twisting, and so he had this clockwise, and he
Yeah.
tried to describe it as he was experiencing it. He was doing this clockwise twist with his hands, and he felt embedded in a static visual reality the sense of his previous reality not being real. That we've mentioned that before. Once he surrendered into the new true reality, he began to slowly wash out of it. So he had about a 4 or 5 minute experience of dipping down into this altered reality and then washing back. And so his experience was repeated. He had a few.
Oh,
He had a few trials at it, and basically did 3 separate brief 5-minute trips, all while being recorded. And again, each time, right after he smoked, only seconds after he smoked, you would see these 10-second long 1,000 microvolt waves. And some people would think, oh, what's that, movement artifact? No, it's not movement artifact. I've seen more EEGs than anyone should ever see. And I know movement artifact. And some people will say it was perspiration artifact. Well, perspiration artifacts you can start at a given point in time, but after that, the phase of the waves randomizes because you can't synchronize your sweat glands. These were synchronized 1,000 microvolt waves. These were brain alterations in glial function. And that's what generates these large, slow waves. Anyway, it was quite the experience for all of us who were there. And again, it was witnessed by maybe close to 30 people in a hotel room. It was crowded. It wasn't like a workshop space. This was literally a hotel room. There are people sitting on everything you could sit on, the air conditioner, the beds, the chairs, the desks, the floor. It was, if you walked across the room, you'd have to tiptoe over people's legs to get around. But everyone watched John do his trip and come back and do his trip and come back, and little 5-minute recoveries and a 5-minute trip and a 5-minute recovery and a 5-minute trip again with a 20-minute baseline at the beginning of it. And again, we presented it 3 years later. Now, a professional society can't really have people doing drugs in the hotel, So this wasn't like a official sanctioned event. And the altered section, ASS, was formed specifically for this event. David Stuckey agreed to head up the ASS, and I was the head of legislation and ethics, the asshole. We had this whole totally hilarious caca joke thing that was written up as a memo and sent to the president of ISNR at the time as an email summarizing what had happened. And I got a note back saying, I don't know if this is just some crazy, hilarious thing that you just wrote, or if this actually happened. But, either way, I can't know about it. So, but again, it was 3 years before we ended up with this presentation and a full discussion of the neurochemistry of salvia. Anyway, it was a historic PowerPoint that I hadn't seen in far too long, and I figured I'd share that silliness with the group.
Oh, well, we love your silliness. The only thing that was missing was bad art, but I'm sure we'll get some of that.
We plagiarized better art.
Is there any correlation between that salvia or a drug of choice, and then at end of life when you're starting to... Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Pass away or you see the light, is there any correlation?
There may be some altered consciousness states like that end up being experiences that you have. The feeling like everything that you have had in life has passed is a real experience. You know, people that have near-death experiences can tell you this.
Yeah. Or
and
go on Instagram.
Yeah. So, you know, um, it's probably an extreme statement of it, and the experience is probably extraordinarily accentuated because of 1,000 microvolt, 10-second long wave. However, let's. Have you ever seen a brain die electrically?
I prefer
I
not to.
have. I have. So, you if you're recording, you can record the EEG, and they're looking for the possibility of somebody actually being dead. They're not responding. They're in a coma state, and they're looking to see whether there's brain activity or not. And so you hook up the EEG, and you know you you can see some patterns that augur a very poor outcome. They predict a grave prognosis, meaning the next thing you're going to be is in a grave.
You mean like
That's
the front of the brain isn't working, but the back of the brain is working to keep functions going?
as you start to go, it all starts to go.
Okay.
So when when you're looking at the EEG, you've got activity that will slow, and that's a diffuse encephalopathy. It's not death. And then you can see the voltages drop, and that's a further progression. But sometimes they go from that slowness into a frontal alpha, called an alpha coma or an alpha-theta coma. If it's a little slower, it's a alpha-theta coma or a theta coma. But it's a rhythmic activity up front. It's non-responsive to input. The brain itself is still not dead, but this is not likely to be recovered from. It's almost without exception a grave prognosis. There's one step beyond that. The frontal alpha quits. The brain goes flat, and you think, oh, well, that's brain death. But then there's a burst suppression. The brain is flat, and then suddenly there's hundreds and hundreds of microvolts of gigantic slow paroxysm. And then it goes flat again. And then it bursts, and then it goes flat. Burst suppression is one of the very last things that you can see before it's all flat. It's the brain having resurgent bursts of activity. Some say it's metabolic degradation. Yeah, it's pathological degradation of the brain, and that's making all the big slow things. But the the brain actually has surges of energy, not normal alpha frequencies. These are all slow paroxysms, but the brain bursts very large, and as it goes flat. Now, you can be brain dead, and in some places they don't really consider that death. If your heart stops, they consider that death. And I've actually recorded an EEG that was a flat EEG, and the guy coded code blue, but there wasn't a resuscitate order on him. So I just recorded him having a brain death and the heart having stopped. It sputtered a little bit, but it stopped. And that's, I mean, that's it at that point. No brain, no heart. That was just documentation that was the end. So, and when he coded, the alarm went off. But when the nurses came in, they realized what case it was, and they just said, "Well, that's that." So
What? So, Jay, when I've kind of went on my internet tangents in a off hour time of the morning, I saw something about the fourth dimension, and I'm way ahead of my skis here. But the question I have to ask you is, life is all about feedback. We're all about feedback and reading frequency waves up and down, amplitude. Does that wave ever stop?
well, uh, time is the illusion.
Yeah,
So you've got to watch out for that one. And that obviously you're pointing out a dimension.
yeah.
But now there are scientists that think we're in multiple parallel dimensions, and they're trying to figure out how to connect through the dimensions. And I suggest they'll find a wormhole and they'll reach through with both hands and find their ass with both hands finally.
But
You
I,
know,
but
you know,
I ask,
I
I got. But
yeah.
does that wave ever stop?
In fact, the assumption of the Fourier is that it's a sine wave that began at the beginning of time and it will go on till eternity. Now, I'm not that old and I won't live that long.
Right.
So my waves aren't going to do that. So what waves are they talking about? You know, uh, uh, you know. So there's some logical, illogical things about the Fourier. It assumes everything's a permanent sine wave. You've seen enough EEG. Is it all sine waves?
No.
Mm, I see some pointy little suckers in there. So mu has little points on it. A perfect 10, mu at 10 hertz with a point on the bottom won't give you a 10 in the frequency spectrum from the Fourier. It'll give you a 10 and a 20. Where was the 20? There wasn't a 20. There was a point. It was non-sinusoidal. And because it wasn't a sinusoidal waveform, for the Fourier to recreate it, it has to create the primary frequency and some harmonics with weird phase shifts to make the little point on it. So, and it it it's not really a 10 and a 20 and a 40 and so forth. It's not multiple harmonics. It's a non-sinusoidal waveform, and the Fourier assumes everything's a sine wave, and it assumes there's no transients. You've seen transients in EEG before, haven't you? Little things that come and go. Well, they weren't permanent from the beginning of time to ending of time, and they're a transient. They violate the assumption of the Fourier. The Fourier assumes stationarity, the permanence of the sine wave. It assumes no transients. And the final thing it assumes is no state change. Well, for God's sakes, have you ever heard of the vigilance model? you know, they track state changes, little up and down levels of vigilance changes. You're changing state constantly. The vigilance model has the vigilance algorithm. With your eyes closed, they can track second by second by second what level of vigilance you're in. And it changes, I mean, consistently. All the way from being more vigilant to being less vigilant to finally, falling asleep. The altered state, the changing of state happens all the time. It violates the Fourier. So we violate every assumption the Fourier has. Why are we using it? Well, Berger did. It's a way to decompose waveforms if they're sinusoidal, uh, if they're sinusoidal, you can decompose them. If they're non-sinusoidal, what are you going to get? Funny stuff, harmonics and weird results. So, there are alternate ways to analyze for frequency. You can decompose the raw EEG into its component parts with wavelets. And wavelet analysis, which is a perfectly appropriate form of analysis, isn't as old as Fourier. I mean, Fourier goes way back, but it was in the late 1980s, I believe, when wavelets were first trotted out. So it's a relatively new, and when I say relatively new, I mean EEG is 100 years old. you know, so
Did I miss the
relative.
birthday?
Yeah, well, actually, Rudolf Hertz had his birthday last Saturday. If he would have made it, I think it was his 167th or 68th birthday, something like that. And he described all the mathematics of waveforms, and obviously cycles per second got his name. So, I honor that. I'll honor Richard Caton, who found that you could see when the brain became active, it shifted electronegative and turned red. And that was the slow cortical potential being identified. And they were on to animals having EEG activity. We didn't need a Nazi, Berger, to discover it. It would have been discovered elsewhere. That was a zeitgeist. It would have happened. There were people with that kind of an amplifier looking at animals, just not at humans. But Berger was that kind of guy. He was sticking thermometers into people's brains. He was a Nazi. He was on sterilization boards. Uh, not somebody to celebrate. So I don't celebrate Berger finding EEG. I celebrate Caton and Hertz, and and some of the people after uh, Berger, Adrian and Matthews in England, Lennox in Harvard, and the Gibbs, and there's a bunch of early electroencephalographers that were instrumental in bringing out what we could find with the EEG. I mean, in Lennox's lab, they in the early 1930s, they saw that you could actually see epilepsy in the EEG. Gibbs and Gibbs, and Gibbs and Gibbs in the 1950s had big, thick atlases full of pictures of EEGs and EEG patterns that were identified. Some of them had been seen in epileptics, but they had also been seen in non-epileptics, so they were non-specific. But they were seen in epilepsy too. So they weren't exactly a normal pattern. But in the 1960s and 70s, the academics got into EEG and not just the medical folks, and they dismissed patterns that weren't diagnostically specific. So we've lost a lot of the wisdom of the early pioneers, and it was glossed over by statisticians trying to purify things and focus on the DSM, which obviously it wasn't real anyway. So,
Jay, another episode of mental ski jumping that I played a part of was as I was getting ahead of my skis, I saw something about nonverbal autism. When you have two kids with that condition, some people think that they can speak to each other telepathically. Is that even possible?
uh, well, uh, um, people can share memories, archetypal memories. The things that we don't understand about consciousness exceed the things we understand about consciousness. And telepathic communication is something that people experience, and it's ineffable. You can't really explain how it happens, but it happened with Berger, and that's why he got into EEG. He, tried to communicate with his sister somehow. And anyway, that he thought it was going to be psychiatry, and at best, it's become a dumbed down neurology. And it's unfortunate because neurology underappreciates the EEG. I mean, we were recording an EEG, and the neurologist who was doing the CPT task had 2 epileptiform bursts in his EEG. And as we're cleaning up the data to go through and look at the event-related potentials, they say, oh, look, epileptiform content left frontally. He says, oh, I'm surprised anybody saw it. It's meaningless. That's what they think. An epileptiform burst in your brain, and you think it's meaningless. What a freaking idiot. And he's educated about it. He should know better. He just did a CPT task. He had 2 errors, less than normal. He's a neurologist. He had a superior behavioral performance on the CPT, less omissions than normal, a couple, but less than normal. No commission errors, good reaction time, low variability. So you'd think, well, he's fine. And he thought he was fine. The 2 errors happened when the 2 discharges happened. Now tell me they're meaningless. It's a shame. 70% plus of the autism kids have epileptiform content in their EEG, and they're not having seizures, so neurologists won't give them anticonvulsants. We've shown 85% of the time they get better with the use of an anticonvulsant. You're denying care. You're denying care where it should be given. If the EEG shows epileptiform content, an empirical trial and an anticonvulsant to see if you can rid the EEG of the spikes ends up being very, very useful. And again, 85% of the time we had good success with it. So how can you argue against an 85% success rate? And it wasn't a small n. There were 76 patients. It was a good sized trial. So, oh well. It's not going to change how neurologists believe. They still think that if you're not having a convulsion, that the epileptiform content in your brain doesn't really matter. So it's oh well. They need to see more EEGs. An average neurologist has 6 months of training specializing in EEG. An electroencephalographer or epileptologist has 1.5 years or more. And I think 1.5 years is like not quite enough to get your green behind the gills gone. I mean, it takes a lot of experience before you're any good at it at all. And 1.5 years of specialized training will start to let you see some of the findings, but you still need the experience of seeing a lot of EEGs. So, and it's hard to get that.
It's easy to get that in Suisun City, isn't it, Jay?
Well, once a year for my birthday, we have folks pop in and we do discuss EEG stuff for a few days. I've got an old friend from Macedonia, the Academy of Art and Science in Macedonia, coming over to do a talk on paroxysmal activity in autism.
Which friend is that?
Silvana. Details will okay. Come out as things go forward. And
all right, fair enough. We don't, just trying to wet the whistle here, Jay.
We got Leigh Steinberg outed already, and that's an interesting twist. You think, well, what's a sports agent doing at a
what does he know
EEG
about the
meeting?
Mind and the games that you can play with one's mind?
Geez, maybe, all the football players he represented that got their heads banged around, but nevertheless, it'll be an interesting time. And we have other luminaries. Well, we've got dear to my heart, glorified tech, Santiago. from where the hell is he now? It's where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? No. Where in the world is Santiago? I mean, he was in Romania, and then Brazil, and now he's over in Thailand. And
He's got some serious frequent flyer miles.
Don't you know when he tries to come into the U.S., they're gonna look at his passport.
Oh,
He's
no.
they're gonna do a strip search on that poor guy,
Santiago, we kid.
No, it's not easy coming through the U.S. Dirk avoids it if he can, because when he travels, he doesn't have enough luggage and things. He's really suspicious, who travels with only a computer and a little tiny handbag,
Well, that's a lot of wires.
He's got a house and lab and everything in Europe, and he is in New Zealand as well. He just has to get back and forth between them. So,
no, outstanding. Jay Gunkelman, another great show, man. Thank you so much for showing up.
Well, sure. And John DeLuca is still around. He's had his difficulties with his health and everything, but he's my age, and for goodness sakes, there's a whole bunch of people my age that aren't. So he's still around, and enjoying life. He's popped back in and out a couple of times. I've been in touch with him over the years, but I'd lost track of this PowerPoint. I found it on a thumb drive and thought, well, I got to share this.
That's a fantastic PowerPoint. You got any more like that? I can't wait. That's
I'm full of old weird PowerPoints. I found a thumb drive full of old PowerPoints, so I have to yet to sort through and see which ones are not on my computer and load them in.
We can downgrade them in Windows 95, not a problem. Jay Gunkelman, you have a great weekend. Say hi to Renita for me.
Will do. And the skies have been...
Yeah, where is Sky?
Well, this morning, Renita's at home, so I'm second fiddle, if that.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's got standards, and I'm not it. So.
I know the feeling.
Oh, he's on my lap half the time. He's a good pup, but who takes him for walks? Renita.
Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. Well, have a great day.
It's good to see you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.